Well, good afternoon. It's great to see so many of you still here. It's been a long couple of days. I've had a lot of fun just hanging out. Usually at DEVCON, I just come to meet all of you and have fun. And I try to stay out of the way and be useful, picking up trash and cleaning up plates and things. But I guess today they asked me to do the roadmap. I think part of the reason is because I do a lot of work in marketing these days. And a lot of times product roadmaps can be a bunch of lies. And so they said, since I have so much practice with that, I can go ahead and do that. So I want to talk about some of the ideas we've had about how to evolve Liferay in the future. And after I give my section, Jorge's going to talk about all of the things that really relate to this audience. Those are the improvements for the developer platform part of Liferay. But what I want to talk about is really what all of you enable in the product. All of the cool features around modularity, services, and resiliency enable us then to build a lot of things that are useful ultimately to your customers and the end users. You may have seen this slide in the past talking about how Liferay all fits together to produce a certain solution. If we want to summarize it in 3 parts, it's reaching an audience, whether it's customers, employees, government constituents, across many different channels. In the past, we've mostly talked about web and mobile, but now we're starting to think about things like connected devices and the Internet of Things. And then throughout the life cycle, what we mean by this is there are a lot of products out there that really only focus on acquiring customers. You've heard of like Adobe Experience Manager. They're really only concerned about the marketing side. With Liferay, we really care about not only acquiring customers, but taking care of them after the fact. And this is one of the roles that portals have traditionally played, whether it's self-service portals or customer portals, things like that. We really want to think about what the customer is doing at every stage of their relationship with the company. So let's take a look at the Liferay platform and the value that it provides. Most of you know of Liferay in the following way, which is we have a lot of tools for creating websites and within the last couple of years, mobile applications, whether they were native, hybrid, or mobile websites. Part of the reason why this was really easy was because Liferay always had a lot of cool functionality out of the box, content, collaboration, social, workflow, and all of that stuff. And unlike the infrastructure portals of the past, we had functionality that you could use right away. But not only that, this is DEVCON, and the reason you're here is because our engineering team has always made it a priority to make everything configurable, extensible, and customizable. Of course, as a portal platform, it's very important to think about all of the things that your customers already have in their backend. So we've made it easy to integrate backend systems through APIs and web services, and then to expose all of that information up into the UI layer. So where do we want to go next with this? One of the things we've realized at Liferay is that the world doesn't just revolve around Liferay. It'd be great if your customers built all of their websites and mobile apps on Liferay, but a lot of them, quite frankly, are going to use other frameworks and platforms to do so. So one of the things that Jorge and the engineering team has been trying to do is make it easier to surface content, data, and applications in Liferay to non-Liferay third-party websites. You've been able to do that for many, many years now through our web services, whether it's HTTP or JSON. But we want to look at that even deeper. And Jorge is going to talk about this a little bit more, but basically make our APIs even more useful and design them to be consumed by remote services. And of course, we're also thinking about how this is going to play out with connected devices, Internet of Things. Not much there to say yet, but it's part of the vision. So once you have all of this, and you've got all of these different points of interaction going, how do you bring it all together? One of the big questions is, if you're engaging with a company in a business process, and you leave off from one channel and start off in another, how can we provide continuity? Some of the large tech companies like Apple and Google are starting to think about these things. If you're an Apple fan and you use iOS and your Mac, you know that you can, with iOS 9 and El Capitan, now you can open Maps and then send an address to your phone. If you've been browsing a website on Safari desktop, you can open it in mobile and so forth. So that's a very, very small scope of this idea of continuity. In your companies and your customers, there are a lot of uses for this that we're trying to figure out. Okay, and then finally, as we get users interacting across all of these different interfaces, how can we then bring the information that we learn about those users back into the portal? So we're looking at how to get analytics and activity tracking so that all of that comes back into the portal. We can better understand users and then serve their needs. So that's kind of the high-level vision of where we want to go with Liferay. Let me break it down a little bit and take it step by step. Okay, so first of all, how can we modernize the experience of building websites? Well, when we first built the Liferay content management system, this was back in the mid-2000s, I believe, and the nature of websites was very different back then. Back then, it was seen as a publishing channel for taking existing real-world content and putting it online. Well, now, obviously, the web is the primary way that we consume and interact with information, and sites like The Verge really signify a modern website. If you look at The Verge, if you read websites like this, you know that there's a dynamic list of content, and it's changing all the time, and yet somehow they're able to not only update the site constantly to show the latest articles, I believe it also has some degree of personalization so that the expressed interests that you have are reflected in the site. So we want to make it easier for Liferay to be used to build sites like The Verge, and even more in the future as we look at not just web-based desktop sites, but also mobile. So one of the ways that we've thought about how to do that is how you map sets of content to published websites. So here in this example, we have a folder in the document library. It's got 5 different PDFs. And we want to create landing pages on a website where people can browse, find information about that PDF, and then download it. So we want to make it easy for you to map that set of content, whether it's web content articles, documents, videos, or something else, to a public addressable landing page. Another feature of modern web is that a lot of sites or a lot of landing pages are a mixture of design and content. So if you look at Liferay CMS, the way it was designed, you have a separation of design and content. I think a lot of content authors are actually bringing them together. So we're thinking through how to better support landing pages that look like this one for the Nexus 6, and then also incorporate marketing concerns like calls to action, page performance, and click-throughs. The web content management team has constantly been innovating and improving the CMS, and another area that we're looking at is how to improve the experience of authoring a content page. So this is just slideware, to be honest, at this point. But we're imagining that end users will be able to dynamically design a page template by actually physically dropping dividers on the page, and then being able to then configure each of those sections individually. One of the big shifts in thinking we've had since the advent of mobile is that when drag and drop was really cool back in like the late 2000s. This was when people weren't actually using mobile devices to author content. Now we realize that that's not really going to work on a touch screen. So we're doing a lot of tapping and then tapping again to configure or to add and to move things. So we imagine being able to not only design the page, but then also insert different content or different sort of semantic content holders into different parts of the page. Okay, and then when you're done with all that, taking that first idea of a content set and the page that you've designed, you should be able to have this very old concept of mail merge that you probably only see in like Microsoft Word or something like that today, where you're able to cycle through a list of content and see how it appears in that page template that you've created for the entire set. We're also thinking about mobile. So once you've designed a page for the desktop, you may want to decide that certain pieces of content are not applicable on a mobile view, or you may want to change the order in which they appear. And so we imagine being able to click and to configure that, let's say the navigation, in this case, is going to be a hamburger menu, that the navigation items in the bottom are actually floating panels, and that certain components like the advertisement are actually going to be skipped for the mobile version. Okay, so that's it for modern websites. The next topic I want to talk about is forms. If you were in the session, I believe it was yesterday, you've probably seen some of the evolution that we've already been able to accomplish with our form designer. It's coming along really nicely. If you haven't yet, I do encourage you to check it out. It's constantly being updated even now, even though we're at milestone 7 of Liferay 7. But here's just a little screenshot on the left of not the most up-to-date, but one of the pretty up-to-date versions of the new form designer. And I called this section Getting Beyond Excel because I personally really believe that if you get an online form right, it can actually be more powerful than Microsoft Excel. And yet, as a business user, and talking to a lot of business users, I find that so many of them still prefer using Excel because it's more intuitive, it's just easier to use a non-web-based interface, and it gets the job done. So what are some of these things that could be more powerful than Excel if we did it online? One of the ideas we had was that you could actually have a Liferay form mapped to an integrated backend service to automatically populate a drop-down selection field. So in this example, maybe someone is filling out an order form for one of their products, and instead of having to hard code or to periodically update your product catalog, having the form actually integrated into something like SAP, where the most up-to-date list of product SKUs is always going to be populated in that form. So when products get discontinued, they're removed, and when you add new products, they're available as well. This next idea really came when I was filling out a lot of expense forms, and I was always trying to find what the, I try to be as honest as possible, so I would go back to the actual date of the expense to find out what the foreign exchange rate was between the euro and the dollar or whatever. So that's a lot of work. You could actually have a field that would find out what the date was for the expense and then find the actual exchange rate for that date. Of course, we're also thinking about making forms mobile-friendly. And this has been one of the mobile-first design has really driven even the new form design. So please do talk to our forms team about that. OK, so forms and websites, these are all different ways to interact with your users. What does that then imply in terms of what else we need to support this with? One is the thing that I mentioned, so creating seamlessness across the different channels. In my job, I have to fly a lot. I attend a lot of these conferences. I'm often working with our different teams across the globe. And one of the biggest things that I always struggle with is flight delays and cancellations, right? And I was in Chicago on a connection from LA to Ohio for a sales meeting. And we were late leaving Los Angeles. And so as soon as we landed, I opened up the mobile app for United, and I was trying to figure out what I should do. I was starting to look at different options, and I found that United had already figured out that my flight was delayed, and they gave me several different options for a later flight to take for the connection. So I didn't stop there. I ended up actually talking to a real person at customer service, but when I did, I actually had to re-identify myself and have them look up my flight information. So I think one of the things we'd like to see in the future is a platform that helps those customer service agents automatically know who I am even as I approach their desk. And then they should be able to pull up my flight information before I even tell them who I am. So continuity is sort of the big topic there. In this example, we imagine someone starting to fill out a customer survey on the mobile app, and then when they actually visit the website asks them if they want to actually continue that. And that, of course, we're thinking about all of the different channels, including digital interactions and in-person ones. Okay? So once we've got all the channels and once we've got them all working together, we want to be able to measure and see how effective they are at achieving our goals. And again, the industry is talking a lot about digital marketing, but as Liferay, we want to have a much wider concern than that. Not just digital marketing, but also employee engagement. Are people finding what they want on the internet? Are partners able to fill out and complete the business processes online that you have on their partner portal? So how can we do that? First of all, in Liferay today, we've developed audience targeting, which is a separate plugin in an app that you can add to Liferay. But you have the basic user profile information that was part of Liferay since a very, very long time. So one of the tasks we have to do is to think about how the user segment functionality and audience targeting should work with the user profiles in the regular Liferay portal. I think over time what we'll find is that the old concept of a static user biography is going to change because who you are as a user, it doesn't stay the same over time. Depending on what you click on, what you've done in the system, and the skills that you acquire, or let's say the social reputation that you develop, your user profile actually evolves and changes, right? So we want to be able to start to fill that idea of the user out. And one of the things that will happen is which user segments you belong to. There are explicit ones, like things based on your age and your like where you live and whether you're male or female. But there are also implicit ones, like people who have clicked on different websites or people who use your mobile app more than twice a day. These are different segments that should be dynamically identified by the system. So we want to add that richness of understanding to user segments. Another concept which I alluded to with The Verge was the concept of a website that has an audience of one. So current audience targeting kind of assumes that you have a static web page, and maybe there's one or two sections that you want to target and customize. It really functions, quite frankly, more like an advertising campaign support system. Depending on who the user is, you show them an ad for DEVCON, or if they're a business user, you show them LPSF. Well, what if we actually had the entire experience be targeted? You may have seen this website on the right, which is banyantree.com. This was actually built on Liferay, but they did quite a bit of customization. And what I've found is that every time I visit, the content is actually slightly different. So I think what they're doing is they've actually got this grid system, and that grid system can be populated with dynamic content that comes from a pool of possible articles that are stored in Liferay CMS, but depending on who you are, that entire experience is actually heavily customized. I also think of it as sort of a Flipboard-style website. Flipboard, of course, you give them your explicit preferences, and they serve you content based on that. But I think dynamic websites or web experiences can actually do that implicitly as well. And then finally, this really is more of a marketing concern, but the concept of a call to action. So you've all probably seen websites, and they have those big glowing buttons that tell you what they want you to do. If it's a GitHub repository, it says fork now, or if it's an open source project, it probably says download. It's kind of a UX-driven way of telling the user what you really, really want them to do. But as a marketing person, what I've found is that when you try to design CTAs for a landing page, it's actually quite artificial to say, well, if they're at the bottom of this product overview page, they probably should be doing this specific thing every single time. I think what's more appropriate is when you take the entire session into account. So let's say they first clicked on the product overview, then they went over to a technical white paper, and then they visit the product features page. Two of those pages are fairly general, but one of them is very technical. So based on that, the three things you did, you're going to guess that they're probably a technical person. And so like audience targeting, I think a CTA manager could basically show the appropriate CTA for that person based on what they've done. And that way, it's actually also a lot easier to manage for the marketing people, that they don't have to choose a very specific CTA for every single page, but they just have a CTA manager, and that's going to dynamically serve the right one based on what their user has done. Another thing that I don't think any vendor has gotten really completely right is path analytics. So Google Analytics was really designed, I think, for an era of static web pages, where most pages are kind of the same, and you just want to see, after they visited this page, they visited this page. But it's not really taking into account which CTA on the page did the person click. It's got some functionality around goals and so forth, but it's not really easy to trace through whether the paths that you've designed for your marketing or other goals are really effective. And so we want to look at how to improve that and have that actually native to the Liferay platform, so you don't have to go outside and integrate all these third-party analytics tools that, quite frankly, aren't really designed for the Liferay CMS. All right, so this next part about user profiles, I probably talked about earlier with the user segments. So we want to have our user profiles actually have much more semantic aspects, more meaning, rather than just having, let's say, custom fields that are shown in a big list. We want to make it possible for people to configure and say that these custom fields actually represent these aspects of the user and so forth. But the other side of that is not only the profile, but we also want to understand the relationship that the user has with the company. So this is a screenshot from a product called HubSpot that we use at Liferay for our marketing. It's able to detect significant activities and interactions with the system that the user has performed over the course of their relationship with you. So here you can see whether they viewed specific pages that are significant, or whether they've participated in a GoToWebinar, or whether they've filled out one of your surveys. So we totally see that Liferay can also help you understand if you have mobile apps that are connected back to Liferay through the Liferay Mobile SDK, are the users using it? How frequently are they using it? What are the most useful features? We want to have this useful feedback, obviously for the business users, but also for developers. I think it would be really useful to see whether the apps that you've built are being used the way that you imagined. Most of the major software vendors like Safari or Google Chrome or Microsoft Word, they will, if there's like, if your application suddenly crashes, it says, hey, do you want to send anonymous diagnostic information back? So it's something like that as well, where we can see what users are actually doing with the apps we build and then evolve it over time. Okay, I'm actually cutting into Jorge's time, so I'm going to rush through this last bit, which is, after all of that, we really want to do a better job of measuring everything that's going on, all of the interfaces, whether they are in Liferay or whether they're in a third-party platform. We want to be able to see how they're performing, give information to power users and developers on how we can actually improve and evolve these things. All of us are now probably very much embracing and convinced of the benefits of agile methodology for developing software. Think of this as agile methodology for websites and content. Rather than spending a lot of time to get your website perfect, throw something out there and see how the users respond to it. And based on what they're clicking and what they're not clicking, you can then evolve it over time. So that's a lot of stuff. I'm sure we won't be able to get to all of it within the next version of Liferay, but we'll definitely listen to your feedback as well to see how to prioritize this stuff. Ultimately, none of this would be possible without the underlying core platform of Liferay, which is super flexible and designed to build functionality like this. And so we are going to invest in that platform as well. And to talk about that, I'm going to welcome Jorge to the stage.
Thank you, Bryan. So I wanted to start by thanking Bryan. It's really a privilege for all of us to hear. He has a really visionary mind, and I thought he was going to do a much better job at explaining this, and he's certainly done it. So I also want to thank you guys, okay? Because we've put a lot of effort during the last couple of years into building what has become Liferay 7. It's a huge amount of improvements, and especially architectural improvements. And many of you have come to me and some of the other Liferay guys and have said, wow, it's awesome. Or some of you have even started playing with it and have started doing some things that are pretty cool. But I want to thank you even more for some other reason, which is that some of you have also told me that it's awesome, it's looking so good, it's what I wanted, but now I have to learn so much. But now I have to change all my apps. But now, oh man, how am I going to do this, right? And that is true, and that's a fear that we had as well. And that's probably one of the reasons why we are putting so much effort into making upgrading to Liferay 7 easier, even much easier than upgrading to a previous version, even if it has so many changes in the way of working, right? And that's why we've put so much effort into making things backwards compatible in the sense that the old way of doing things works. However, thinking about all of this, you probably are going to like the #1 feature of the next version of Liferay. Because that #1 feature is that it's going to be stable. Okay? We're not going to change it all over again anymore. So we are really happy with the result. We really think that Liferay 7 looks like this. It's a rock-solid foundation on top of which to build things. Things that we are already building, things that we will continue building along the lines of what Bryan has explained, and things that we expect you to build. And for that, we know that you need that stable core and not having to think, OK, I need to be ready for upgrading it to whatever next version comes after, okay? So that's probably the #1 important thing that I want to tell about the next version of Liferay after 7. But there are also some other improvements at the architectural level, not at the architectural level, actually, but at the platform level and for developers. This is not going to be a complete walkthrough through all the things that we have in mind, but I wanted to highlight a few of them. So first of all, we've been talking about Liferay as a microservices platform. And we've really done tons and tons of improvements. But we have more in mind. First, we want to support even lighter headless usage of the Liferay portal or of the Liferay core. Okay? So we want to make it even easier than it's already in Liferay 7 for you to decide, I want to get rid of these things. Actually, I may want to get rid of all the UI of Liferay and just use it as an API. And then in Berkeley, maybe through remote mechanisms, maybe through mobile phones or Internet of Things devices, or maybe locally through applications that are built completely from scratch. We want you to be able to do that because we think that will allow you to use Liferay and leverage the knowledge that you have in Liferay in more and more scenarios. But we want to take this even one step further. Imagine if not only you are able to do this, but we have this concept that we are calling application fabric. And then you may have one main instance of Liferay. Let's assume this is a big instance with lots of features, UI. And in here, in this main instance, you actually have a way to configure, manage, and launch additional instances that may have just one application or one microservice. Or maybe you can configure another instance that maybe has 2 applications. Or maybe you can say, of the first one, I'm having lots of users. So I'm just going to go and launch several instances. And initially, that will be done manually. But eventually, we want that scaling to be done completely automatically for you. So now we're really talking about fully featured microservices platform and that you can use and you can benefit from whether you're using microservices or applications. So The second important thing that we want to keep working on is Liferay as a web services platform. So this insists on the idea that you may want to use Liferay even just as an API server. And you've probably seen Carlos' presentation, where he's shown how not only we want to expose Liferay's functionality through a set of web APIs, like we do with JSON Web Services and SOAP, but we want to provide a very good standards-based API builder so that you can build your own web APIs with exactly what your consumers of that API need. But if we really want to be comparable to any web service platform out there, we need a few further features. So the four more important that we have in mind are these. First, we need to be able to provide management of those APIs. And specifically, we need to be able to allow you, as you publish your APIs, to define quotas. So that you can say, these consumers that they've paid so much or that they haven't paid, they can consume this much. But then these others have a higher quota, for example. Not only that, you need to be able to learn how those consumers are using your app. So you need to be able to do API auditing and then be able to do API analytics and usage reports. And then we also need benefits on the security side, right? So we want to integrate with OAuth 2, not only for authentication, but also for authorization. And also for our existing JSON web services, we are not sure if we'll do it with OAuth or not, but we also want to support application tokens. Because that's one of the limitations that there is right now, that is you need to use the password to access the JSON web services that come out with Liferay out of the box. So this really positions Liferay even better as one of the things that we are seeing most interesting in the next months and years to come, which is Liferay as a mobile enterprise application platform, and not only as a mobile enterprise application platform, but it's very well positioned as a platform to service the wide range of usages that the Internet of Things will come with. And of course, Liferay is used in very big companies for very big and critical projects. And security is an increasing concern. So we also want to do quite a few improvements on the security side. I wanted to highlight two that I think are interesting to mention. One of them is, as you know, over the last few years, we've been working a lot on improving this support for SAML. And actually, SAML is actually catching up in many services. A lot of software, both on-premise and on the cloud, are actually using SAML. We have a full implementation of SAML, both consumer and provider. But there are some specific services that we are seeing are becoming very popular that require some specific extensions to SAML that are optional. And we want to implement those so that we can integrate with all of these new and unpopular services. And the second feature is also very interesting for these critical environments. Let me tell you a story so that you understand why it's so important. Some time ago, I learned that one of our customers was going to shut their whole site down. I'm like, how come? And they said, well, because we've told them that there is a security issue. But we've told them that we're going to provide a fix tomorrow. I'm saying, oh, very nice of us, right? But they have this policy that if there is any security issue of a certain severity, they need to shut down the whole site until they have a fix. So there are critical systems that are really that critical. So one of the things we want to do to prevent situations like that is, well, first, we're going to provide you the fix whenever we say there is a security issue, but you may find out through other means. But we want to support this idea of an application firewall. And it says application, but again, in this case, it could also be a service firewall. Basically, what this allows is an administrator to selectively seal specific apps or specific services, even specific API calls, when somehow you learn there is some vulnerability that is being used maybe by an attacker, or you fear that it might be, and you have this policy, and you can say, I'm sealing this. This is not going to be used. And of course, that's going to be bad for your users. That feature is not going to work, but you don't need to shut down your whole system. And the final thing that I wanted to highlight is related to this. It's related to you guys, the developer experience. We really care about providing the best developer experience ever. And much of what we've done in Liferay 7 has been done to improve the developer experience. There were certain areas of Liferay that we've had to be very critical with ourselves and recognize that they were really outdated. For example, the way to develop front end. So we've done lots of improvements, and we want to keep going. I could be mentioning tons of things, but more than mentioning specific things that we're going to do, I want to tell you what are the main themes, what are the main 2 things that we have in mind when we try to improve the developer experience. One of them is we want to empower you to be able to do more with less. And you've probably seen that through the different presentations. And actually, this rock-solid platform that we have really allows us to provide more functionalities for developers so that doing less, even coding one single file and just deploying it, it automatically does so much more for you. We've seen it with APIs. We've seen it with configuration. We've seen it with so much more. We also want to learn from the most modern development techniques. You guys have heard about the Launchpad project, where we are trying to build a completely new system for building apps. And we're learning a lot along the way, because that project has no constraints with regards to trying to keep backwards compatibility. And that's allowing that project to innovate much more. But we're also learning from them, for example, how to do things such as real-time web APIs and web applications much faster. And definitely that's something that we're going to incorporate so that with little effort, you can really build this type of complex applications. And the second big guiding rule that we have is allow you to use the tools of choice. This is very important. And I also mentioned in the opening presentation that we've been trying to move away from custom Liferay ways of doing things and custom Liferay tools so that you can really use the state-of-the-art tooling, so that you can use Maven or Gulp or Gradle for building Liferay, so that you can use whatever front-end development tools. We're going to keep providing our own tools where we think they can provide value, but at the same time, we want you to be able to use whatever is the newest or whatever is maybe not the newest, but what your developers know about. Some of you were asking me about it. It's like, oh, now this new thing, you guys just delivered this new configuration API or this new JavaScript framework like Metal.js. And yes, we're going to continue doing that, but at the same time, we're always going to put a focus on making it optional. Because who knows what's going to happen tomorrow, especially in the JavaScript world that is evolving so fast. We are seeing that maybe next year, last year Angular was the best thing since sliced bread, right? And this year it's React. And next year, who knows, right? So you should be able to use that. So that's our vision for the developer experience. We want development for Liferay to feel like you are in flow, like you're super productive, because that way you will build the awesome things that we think this rock-solid foundation will allow you to do. So thanks a lot, and I hope you enjoyed the event. I don't know if we're going to do a raffle. So yeah, we really welcome your feedback, so please keep it coming. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Jorge.